Good evening, ma'am. Today we are at the 5th India-Japan Conference 2026 in Kolkata, hosted by Indo-Japan Business Council in association with Consulate General of Kolkata, Japan in Kolkata. This comes at a historic moment when the Japanese Prime Minister has visited India. And today we speak with Professor Srabani Roy Choudhury, Professor and Center Chair, GNU School of International Study. So, ma'am, my first question is, how do you assess the current trajectory of India-Japan relation, and what role does Japanese Prime Minister visit play in the furthering strengthening of the bilateral partnership?
I think the most important takeaway from this year's joint summit of meet between Takaichi-san and Prime Minister Modi is that no longer are we only looking at trade, aid, and investment, which is generally be the fulcrum on which Japanese, summit meets happen. But this time we've had economic security, supply chain resilience, energy cooperation, people-to-people connectivity as a focus area. So we can see a huge shift. And I think this is particularly a very important shift because the world itself is moving in this direction.
How do you see Northeast India contributing to the India's Act East policy and Japan's Indo-Pacific vision? And what opportunity does Kolkata offer in advancing this strategic dialogue between the two countries?
As far as Japan goes, they have steadily looked at using the Northeast as a gateway to their Indo-Pacific story and connecting not only Northeast India but ultimately Nepal and Bhutan, two landlocked countries, to the Indo-Pacific through the Northeast to Bangladesh, to Matabari port, or even land route all the way till Vietnam. So for Japan, the clarity is very clean. They know what they want out of this, and it is in a way obviously balancing China's, because China and Mekong region is very, very well established. As far as this region goes, I think the biggest challenge has become that there are a lot of political instability, and therefore there has not been a very directed way of integrating towards looking at this as a region rather than individual nations. And it is wrong to assume that another ASEAN can happen in the form of SAARC because the dynamics of ASEAN with small nations is very different to the dynamics of South Asia, where you have large nations and small nations.
Right.
And that history where there is not much of trust among the nations. So we cannot, do this comparison, oh, it happened in ASEAN, it should happen here. No. The idea is, we know that there are differences, but if each country were to ask itself, does this working relation enable us to do this? I think that is where we can work out. Like, after all, China and Japan never has very great political outing, but their businesses have always continued to grow and this is a reflection today that Japan has maximum business with China rather than with any other country, and today they want to therefore find alternatives.
Ma'am, it's often described that India and Japan are magnetically attracted to each other because Japan has a demographic problem and India has an overskill and overpopulation problem. But still, as in the conference, we saw the statistics of ZETRO and different agencies. Comparatively to Asian countries, the number of Japanese companies in India are relatively less. So despite this magnetic attraction, what do you think what could be the reason for this gap that exists and how it can be modified?
Okay, let me clear here something. There is as soon as an alternative supply chain was talked about, people thought that en masse companies will leave China and come to India. No. The reason being very simple. We do not have yet an industrial ecosystem that could absorb the kind of needs of Japan. We are one of the many alternatives. So Vietnam is a big alternative, Indonesia is an alternative, even Malaysia is an alternative, India is a good alternative. We have to rise in rank to enable us to attract. So it is not going to be, big country story. No, that is not how it is going to work. We have to become an attractive destination. But of course, while Japanese have this cultural fear of coming all the way to India. Southeast Asia, I can get my noodles, there is karaoke, there is this, there is that. India is so different, and India is definitely very, it sort of creates a lot of anxiety, because every 200 kilometers the cultures changes, everything changes often for a foreigner. So, and the now noise, the crowd, everything can be a big kind of a distancing factor for an individual. So therefore, many fronts need to work in cognizance, but definitely an ecosystem that tells that there is political stability, there is a policy direction, and there is a roadmap towards finding a profitable venture would be the most attracting reason why companies would come here.
Right. So like both the countries government are investing heavily in people to people mobility and people to people upgrade. So as a academician, what institutional mechanism would you recommend to deepen academic partnership, industry academic collaboration and youth exchange that can sustain the bilateral relationship over a longer period of time between the people?
Okay, of course you need institutional mechanism like an MOU between two universities, but those MOUs in India, we've noticed, are at policy level. MOUs happen, we stop. Two things happen out here. One is that when MOU gets inked in many university, you will see that we expect them, the partnering MOU university, to sponsor our students, etc. Today, for instance, Japan very categorically has lots of programs where they say something has to be borne by your institute. So our government can look at having some kind of endowment in all universities, because comparison happens with IIT, but IIT has a huge alumni group which contributes towards such endowments. But in central universities, etc., where the students' profile is not going to be ones who earn a lot of money, because that is not the profile why those students come to these central universities, and their fallout therefore doesn't have an alumni that contributes towards endowment. So government should look at endowing this. This is one part with respect to institutional setup. With respect to industry thing, I think it is very important that what kind of subjects that needs to be taught, which has a linkage to the needs of the industry, needs to be established. There are often certain smaller gaps in this, and that sort of results in a mismatch between skill that is created to what the industry requirement is.
So, ma'am, my last question is: we are at a historic moment in India-Japan relation. A Japanese Prime Minister who just visited India, a conference in Kolkata that marks a new chapter in the Eastern Corridor of India-Japan relation. So, what does India-Japan mean to you, and what's one thing you want people to understand and remember from today?
I think most important is, I like it that diversification of investments, business, of attracting Japanese business to a new locale is always advantageous. We've seen it happen when it went to Chennai, when it went to Hyderabad. So we've seen those become good industrial ecosystem. And right now, when there is so much of disruptions by wanting it to become green technology, etc., right time to peg it, because this is a pristine area where fear of pollution, etc., was much more, and now we are talking at green technology, so we can sort of embed industries now in this field, in this locale. Third is, this location that we're looking at is essentially very high on education. Citizens essentially believe education is the way of life. So I think harnessing those kind of capability, or even working towards creating more capable thing such that the technology can be embedded well, is probably the route way to take it forward. And I think one major thing why I appreciate this locale is the cultural affinity that it has towards Japan.
Right. One bonus question: how was your overall conference experience?
As I said, even in one of the platforms that I was a part of, that academia gets very little opportunity to interact with business, And for me, that's a very critical bridge that gets created in these kind of conferences, because we get to know about what the business is doing. And I think it becomes today important as an academic person to take those examples back and create, create a repository which can be tapped in by others to look at how they can sort of find their way into, like a Japanese company wanting to find a way into India.
Right. Thank you, ma'am.